It's a warm Friday night in the summer of 1958. You've just pulled your Buick Special into the parking lot of your favorite drive-in restaurant. You haven't even turned off the engine before a girl in a short skirt and roller skates comes gliding up to your window, a bright smile on her face and a little notepad in her hand. She takes your order, skates back inside, and a few minutes later she's back again, hooking a tray right onto the edge of your car door. You eat your burger and your fries and your milkshake without ever leaving your seat, without ever stepping out into the heat, and when you're done she comes and collects the tray and you hand her a tip and you drive away. It was effortless. It was perfect. It was the car hop. And for millions of Americans, it was one of the most beloved rituals of everyday life. So what happened to it? Where did all those girls on skates go, and why did the whole thing just vanish like smoke from a tailpipe? To understand what happened to the car hop, you have to understand what created her in the first place. And that story really begins not with restaurants at all, but with cars. By the late 1940s, the American automobile had transformed from a luxury item into something close to a national religion. Families were buying cars faster than they ever had before, suburbs were spreading out from every major city, and with them came an entirely new way of living that was built around the idea of never having to get out of your vehicle if you didn't want to. Drive-in movies, drive-in banks, drive-in churches, yes, those existed too, and of course the drive-in restaurant. It was the logical extension of everything post-war American culture was becoming: fast, mobile, convenient, and built for optimism. The roots of the car hop go back even further, though. The first drive-in restaurants started appearing in the early 1920s and 1930s, mostly in the South and Southwest, where the weather made outdoor dining possible for much of the year. A place called the Pig Stand opened in Dallas in 1921 and is often credited as one of the earliest, drawing in drivers along the highway with the promise of food brought right to their car. The young men who ran out to serve the customers at these early spots were actually called car hops, because they would literally hop onto the running board of your car as you slowed down, taking your order before you even came to a complete stop. It was athletic, it was a little dangerous, and it was just the kind of exciting novelty that Americans fell in love with instantly. By the 1940s and especially into the 1950s, the car hop had evolved from a scrappy young guy jumping on running boards into something very different. Drive-in restaurants like Sonic, Dog N' Suds, A&W, and dozens of regional chains had figured out that young women in uniforms were a much more effective draw for their core customer base, which was primarily teenagers and young families. The car hop became a female institution almost overnight. She was typically between 16 and 25, she wore a distinctive uniform that varied by restaurant chain, and at the more theatrical establishments she wore roller skates, which allowed her to serve more cars faster and added a flash of showmanship to the whole operation. People didn't just go to drive-ins for the food. They went for the experience of it. And the car hop was the heart of that experience. The job itself was harder than it looked. A car hop at a busy drive-in on a Friday night might be managing 10, 12, 15 cars at once. She had to memorize orders, balance heavy trays, collect money, make change, and do all of it while navigating a parking lot full of moving vehicles, sometimes on wheels. The physical demands were real, and the pay was modest at best. Car hops were considered tipped employees, which meant their base wage was often barely anything at all, and whether you made decent money in a shift depended almost entirely on how generous the customers were that evening. A good car hop developed a kind of social intelligence that went well beyond slinging burgers. She learned which tables, or rather which parking spots, were worth her attention and how to read a customer in seconds. For teenagers coming of age in the 50s and early 60s, the drive-in restaurant wasn't just a place to eat. It was a social hub. It was where you went after the football game, after the Friday night dance, after the movies. You pulled in, you ordered a cherry limeade or a cheeseburger basket, and you stayed for an hour or two because that's what everyone did. The parking lot became a kind of outdoor living room, and the car hop was the connective tissue of the whole social ritual. She knew the regulars by name at the good spots. She remembered what you ordered. She kept the whole thing moving. There was something genuinely warm about it, something communal and unhurried despite the speed of the service, and that combination was rare. Sonic Drive-In, which opened its first location in Shawnee, Oklahoma in 1953, would go on to become the last great preservationist of the car hop tradition, and we'll come back to that. But through the mid-50s and into the early 60s, dozens of independent and regional chains were doing the same thing, building their entire identity around curbside service and the young women who delivered it. It felt like the drive-in restaurant and the car hop were permanent fixtures of American life. They weren't going anywhere. But then came McDonald's. Now, to be fair, McDonald's itself had car hops in its very early days. The original McDonald's in San Bernardino actually operated as a drive-in with curbside service through the early 1940s and into the 50s. But when Ray Kroc began franchising the concept in 1955 and the brothers redesigned their operation, they made a decisive break from that model. The new McDonald's was built around the counter, not the car. You parked, you got out, you walked up, you ordered, and you carried your own food back to your car or ate inside at one of the new indoor seating areas. No car hop. No tray. No tip. The labor costs were slashed, the throughput was dramatically higher, and the prices could stay lower because there was no army of tipped employees to support. The results spoke for themselves. McDonald's and the fast food chains that followed its model, Burger King, Wendy's, all of them, could operate with fewer employees and serve more customers per hour than a drive-in ever could. When you had to sit in your car and wait for someone to skate out to you, there was a natural speed limit on how fast the operation could run. When you replaced that with a counter and a walk-up window, you eliminated the bottleneck entirely. In terms of pure efficiency, the old drive-in model never really had a chance. At the same time, American culture was shifting in ways that worked against the drive-in experience. The post-war optimism of the 50s started giving way to the urgency and social upheaval of the 60s. Life was getting faster and more complicated. The idea of sitting in a parking lot for an hour started to feel less like a pleasure and more like a waste of time. The freeway culture that had helped create the drive-in was now pushing further past it, demanding speed above almost everything else. Families were busier. Women were entering the workforce in greater numbers. Convenience started to mean something different than it had in 1955. It no longer meant having food brought to your window. It meant getting your food in 90 seconds and getting back on the road. There were also economic pressures on the restaurants themselves. Running a drive-in well required a big parking lot, which meant more land, which meant higher overhead. It required a sizable staff of car hops, which meant more labor costs, more scheduling headaches, more turnover. The kitchen equipment for a drive-in was different from a counter-service restaurant. As the fast food chains drove down prices across the industry, drive-ins found their margins squeezed from every direction. One by one, the regional chains that had built their identities around the car hop either converted to counter service, closed entirely, or got swallowed up by larger companies that stripped out the curbside element as soon as they took over. By the early 1970s, the car hop was already a nostalgic figure rather than a contemporary one. The success of American Graffiti in 1973, George Lucas's loving portrait of small-town California life in 1962, leaned heavily on the drive-in aesthetic precisely because audiences already understood it as a symbol of a simpler time that had passed. Mel's Drive-In in that film, with its car hops and its car hop trays and its impossibly vivid neon signs, wasn't just a backdrop. It was an elegy. The culture had already moved on, and the movie knew it. What's remarkable is that while almost everyone abandoned the model, one company held on to it almost stubbornly and eventually turned that stubbornness into a genuine competitive advantage. Sonic Drive-In kept the car hop. They kept the outdoor stalls, kept the speaker boxes, kept the idea that you ordered from your car and someone brought your food to you. For decades, this seemed like nostalgia for its own sake, a regional quirk of a chain that never quite broke through to the national mainstream the way McDonald's or Burger King had. But something interesting happened as the 80s gave way to the 90s and the 90s gave way to the 2000s. People started to miss the experience of the drive-in. The sameness of fast food, the fluorescent lights, the interchangeable dining rooms, the transactional impersonality of it all, it wore on people in ways they didn't always articulate but absolutely felt. And Sonic, just by not changing, suddenly looked distinctive. It looked like a choice rather than an anachronism. The car hop became a selling point. Today Sonic still employs car hops at thousands of locations across the country, and some of them still wear roller skates, though that's largely optional and varies by location and by individual. The company has worked the nostalgic angle deliberately in its marketing, positioning the car hop as a living connection to a golden age of American dining. There's something a little bittersweet about that framing, because it acknowledges what has been lost even as it tries to capitalize on it. A Sonic car hop in 2024 is not quite the same creature as a car hop at a regional drive-in in 1957. The cultural context is different. The social ritual around it is different. But the basic transaction, you stay in your car, someone brings you your food, there's a tray, there's a tip, there's a human moment in what might otherwise be a purely mechanical exchange, that part has survived. So what really happened to the car hop? The honest answer is that efficiency happened to her. Progress happened. The relentless American appetite for faster, cheaper, and more convenient happened. The same forces that emptied out the soda fountain and the full-service gas station and the department store lunch counter eventually caught up with the drive-in. The car hop wasn't replaced by anything better, exactly. She was replaced by something faster. And those are not the same thing, even if we often treat them as if they are. There's a particular kind of American loss that nobody really mourns in the moment, because it happens gradually and because each step along the way seems reasonable. No one decided one Tuesday morning that car hops were finished. It was 1,000 small decisions made by 1,000 different restaurant owners and franchise operators and corporate executives, each one rational in isolation, adding up over time to the disappearance of something that had been woven into the fabric of daily life. By the time people noticed it was gone, it had already been gone long enough to feel irretrievable. What the car hop represented, at her best, was the belief that convenience and warmth weren't opposites. That you could have something quick and easy without sacrificing the human element entirely. That a girl on roller skates gliding up to your window on a summer night was not an inefficiency to be optimized away, but a small, genuine pleasure worth preserving. We optimized it away anyway, and we've been eating our food at plastic tables under fluorescent lights ever since, and somewhere in the back of our minds we know we gave something up to get there. The neon still glows, if you know where to look. There are still sonic locations where a car hop will skate out to your window with your food, and there are still a handful of old-school regional drive-ins scattered across the country that have never changed and never wanted to. When you find one, it feels like finding something you didn't know you'd been missing. That's the thing about losing the ordinary pleasures of a particular era. You don't always know what they meant until they're not there anymore. The car hop meant something. She meant that someone was glad you came.